Now let's talk about selection statements. As we saw a problem statement in the first slide, that we have to print distinction if marks of student is greater than 80, and if marks is not greater than 80, I have to print no distinction. Now, first concentrate on this particular line, that I have to print distinction if marks is greater than 80. Now, how can we do this in Java? We can do this using if statement. So we use the keyword if, we write if, then we write a particular condition. So here the condition is marks is greater than 80. So I write marks greater than 80. So I'll repeat the syntax. If is the keyword, then we have brackets, and inside the bracket I write the condition, whatever condition is there. And if this condition is true, I have a if block. Then what will I do? I will print distinction. So this is all about if statement, simple. So we have a if keyword, we write the condition. So if you just go on the syntax, we have the condition. So the condition is could be anything, that marks is greater than 80, less than 80, or depending upon the problem statement, condition changes. And if condition is true, only if marks is greater than 80, then the execution gets inside this block, and whatever is there inside this block gets executed. So here we have just one statement, system.out.println distinction. So let's say there would have been one more statement that just put grade is equal to A. So this could also would have been there. So whatever number of statements comes inside this block gets executed if this statement is true. Now let's talk about that if, what if this statement is not true. So let's see a code. Now let's see, I have a code here. So I have taken marks variable and I have written a if condition that if marks is greater than 80, system.out.println, for that matter print dis. So I have written short form of distinction. Let's say this is distinction. So I have print distinction. And after this if block, I have a statement to print result. Now let's see what happens. So let's say here I initialize marks with, let's say 80. So if I initialize marks with 80, then this condition becomes true. So what will happen? System.out.println will execute. This particular distinction will get printed. So we will have distinction printed. And after this if block, whatsoever is there in the next statement gets printed as well. So result gets printed. Now let's say there is a situation in which I initialize marks with 60. So let's say I don't initialize with 80, I initialize marks with 60. So what will happen here? Marks is greater than 80? No, this condition becomes false. Hence, whatever is inside this if block, I can say this as if block. So whatever is inside this if block does not get executed, and the control directly comes to this particular place, whatever is after the if block. So in case marks is not greater than 80, this statement, this block will be skipped and this result only will get printed. So if I try to see the flow chart of if, so in case of if, let's see the flow chart, what happens. So we have a condition. So let's say this is for condition. If this condition is true, then whatever is the if block gets executed, and then whatever is there outside the if block, that also get executed. But if this condition is false, then this if block is skipped and whatever is there after this if block gets executed. So this is how if condition works. Now I will go back to the problem statement. This problem statement says that if marks is greater than 80, print distinction, else print no distinction. So I have two options here. What I can do is, I can write two if statements. I can do if marks greater than 80, print distinction. If, I'll put another statement, if marks is less than equal to 80, print not distinction. So if marks is greater than 80, what we are doing? We are doing system.out.println distinction. If it's less than equal to 80, I am printing not distinction. So I am having two if statement. An alternate to this is if else statement. What I can do is, I can simply write if marks is greater than 80, I'm writing sysout for system.out.println. I am printing distinction, and rather than again putting a condition, what we can do is we can simply write else sysout no distinction. So this is the use case of if else. So if we have just two conditions, then we can use if and else. For example, here the marks can either be greater than 80 or less than 80 or equal to 80. For example, here our problem statement is that we just have to take care of two situations, when the number is greater than 80 and the number is not greater than 80. Right? So we have just two situations to take care of. So in these conditions, when we have just two conditions to take care of, we use if else. Now let's see some of the variations of if else. Now let's say I write something like this, that if, let's say I have to calculate attendance also of the student, I have to take care attendance also. So let's say I do something like that, if attendance is greater than 80, again sys out good attendance. And then we also again have a if marks is greater than 80, sys out distinction, else sys out no distinction. Now there are few things to note in this particular code. Very first, as you can see here, that we are not using curly braces. So for if else, if you have just one statement to execute, then it's okay if you are not using the curly braces. So generally curly braces you can use when we have more than one statement, then we want to put them inside a block. So if you write it something like this, if marks greater than 80 without curly braces without definite distinction, it is equivalent to this particular thing. So you can do that. But if you have more than two statements, more than one statement, you should use curly braces. Else, what will happen? That only the first statement will be considered inside the if block. So if I write something like this, if marks greater than 80, sys out distinction, sys out good marks. So in this case, what's happening is that only this sys out is coming inside this if block. This is outside this particular if block. So even if the mark is not greater than 80, this will, sorry, even if the mark is greater than 80 or not, this gets executed. So if you have just one statement, then you can skip this particular curly braces. One thing. Next thing, as you can see that we have multiple if and only one else. So what happens is that else is always associated with the nearest if. So here else is associated with this particular if. So if we have multiple ifs and multiple else, let's say, so we always see that the particular else, what is the nearest if? So that particular else is attached to that particular if. Now we can also have nested if, or let's say nested if else. Nested if else, nested ifs. Let's see a few examples of them. So we can have something like this. If marks is greater than 80, and this if, inside this or if also we can have if statements. If attendance is less than, let's say, 70, sys out, let's say sys out B grade. Else sys out A grade. And then we close this if. So this is nested if. So this is outer if, and this is if else inside this if. So you can do that. But whenever you are doing this, make sure you are keeping track of, that this else is corresponding to which particular if. Similarly, this kind of nesting we can do inside else also. So we can write this statement inside this also. So we can do these kind of nesting inside if and else's. Now, let's say we come across a problem statement that if marks is greater than 80, we give student grade as A, or let's say we print distinction. If marks is greater than 70 and less than equal to 80, let's say we put equal to here, less than 80, we let's say print grade A. And then if marks is greater than 60 and less than equal to 70, let's say we print grade B. And if marks is greater than 50 and less than equal to 60, let's say we print grade C. Else, let's say if marks is less than 40, or let's say if we say that marks is less than 50, then we simply print fail. Let's say we have a problem statement where if marks is greater than equal to 80, I have to print distinction. Else, if marks is greater than 70 and less than 80, we have to print grade A. Else we have to print grade B, grade C, and we have to print fail. So if we have several of such scenarios in which we have to do the, we have several conditions that we have to check, and only one of these conditions could be true. If you think about marks, it can't be possible that the marks is also greater than 60, less than 70, and also less than 70 and greater than 80. The marks could fall in either of these categories. Only one of these conditions will be true. So for taking care of these situations, we use if else if ladder. Let's try to see what is if else if ladder. So in if else if, it looks something like this. We have a if and then we have a condition. Let's say marks greater than equal to 80. Sys out distinction, and then we have else if. So we have if keyword here, we have a keyword here else and if combined. Obviously there's a space in between. We are using both of these keywords and we put one more situation, that if marks is greater than 70 and marks is less than 80, then what will I do? I will sys out, let's say, grade A. Then again we have more situation. We put else if marks is greater than 60 and let's say we put equal to here only, marks is less than 70. Let's say I print grade B. Else if marks is greater than 50 and marks is, let's say, less than 60, we sys out grade C, and at the end we have a else block. Else, what we do is that we simply print failed. I hope it is visible. Else I'll sys out failed. So let me tell you what happens. So let's say the student obtains the marks 75. So this if is checked. If marks is greater than equal to 80, no, then the execution comes to else if. If marks is greater than equal to 70 and marks less than 80, this 75 falls in this category. This condition becomes true. Grade A is printed, and as soon as the condition becomes true, rest of the conditions are not checked. Rest, the program just skips and comes out of this if else if ladder. The else if ladder is coming to an end at this particular place. So let's say there is one more statement after this. Let's say I write after this a particular statement. Let's say statement 1. So let's say I have some statement 1 here which is outside this particular ladder. So as soon as a particular condition gets true, rest of the conditions are skipped and this control comes to this particular statement. Now let's say if the marks is 40. So what will happen? This condition is checked, not true. This condition is checked, not true. This condition is checked, not true. This is also not true since marks is 40. So if none of these conditions are true, none of the conditions mentioned in else if is true, then what happens? The else block gets executed. So if any of these conditions are not true, by default the else block gets executed. So generally we use else if when we have to check more than 2 situations. So if we have just 2 situations, we can simply do if and else, and if we have more than 2 situations, we use else if. We have an alternative to else if which we call as switch. So now let's talk about switch. So once I tell you about switch, then we will discuss that what is the benefit of switch over else if or vice versa. Now let's talk about another statement which is switch statement. So this was all about if, else and if else if. We call this as else if ladder. Now let's talk about switch.